And good evening. Welcome to another edition of Shrewsbury for Responsible Taxation. I am your host, Chris Kirk. We are taping today on February 14th, which is Valentine's Day. And you will notice that this evening I am alone. Unfortunately, my trusty sidekick, Mr. John Lukash, has decided that a romantic dinner with his wife is preferable to sitting here and arguing with me. I can't understand that, but apparently he prefers her company to mine. Anyway, down to business, and we're going to talk about two topics tonight. And one is the Beale School, the replacement for Beale School, and the other is the admission of marijuana shops and such in town. First, I'll lead off with the Beale School Building Committee's meeting, which was held, we're taping on the 14th, it was held yesterday on February the 13th, and yours truly was there. And you may recall from last month's show that I presented a preliminary estimate for the cost of the new elementary school that's going to replace Beale School. And that estimate that I presented in January assumed that the new school would measure 146,201 square feet. And assuming that a construction cost of $326 per square foot, the cost of constructing the building alone would be about $48 million. And when furnishings and other costs were included, the cost would be $60 million. However, during our show, I said that this estimate was only preliminary. The size of the building was still being discussed, and there might be other changes. I said that the building committee would present this month its own estimate for the new school, and it did so during the February 13th meeting. And during that meeting, there was good news and there was bad news. The good news was that the size of the new school was reduced from 146,200 square feet to 1,042,800 square feet. So it's almost, roughly almost 4,000 square feet smaller. And the smaller the school, the lower the cost. However, there was also bad news, and the bad news was very bad. I had assumed that the cost of building the school per square foot would be $326 per square foot. That was based on the current rate of reimbursement by the Massachusetts School Building Authority. However, Paul Queenie, who is the project manager for this construction project, and who's a consultant from PMA Consultants, said that the building committee should expect construction costs to rise by 3 to 5% between now and 2020, when the project is expected to be put out to bid. He told the committee that at present, construction costs range between $414 per square foot to $435 per square foot. And I think we have a little clip where he says that, maybe?
So what I have here on the top of the sheet is the dollars per square foot. The starting point of $414 a square foot as a low on the left-hand column, and the high of $435 a square foot.
Okay. And if those costs rise at a rate of between 3% and 5%, then the cost of construction per square foot in 2020, which is when the project is expected to be put out for bid, that those costs will range between $439 per square foot and $485 per square foot. Now, the estimate that I used way back in January was that a square foot cost of construction would be about $326 per square foot. But these new estimates are over $100 higher than that. And these estimates raise the cost of the new school to a much higher cost than the $60 million that I presented last month. And so to determine the cost of constructing the new school, what you do is you multiply the dollars per square foot by the square footage of the new school. And Mr. McQueenie did that for both the low cost per square foot and the high cost per square foot. And he got a cost of construction that ranged from a low of $63.2 million, which assumes a 3% rate of increase in the cost of construction, to a high of $69.3 million, assuming a 5% rate in the increase of construction costs. I think we have a little clip of that too.
So we can see a spread based upon various assumptions of low escalation rates and high escalation rates of anywhere between $63.2 million to $69.3 million.
Okay. So that doesn't sound too much worse than the $60 million I gave you, except that that's just for the cost of the building. It doesn't include all the other stuff that goes into the building. In order to estimate the total cost of the project, the Massachusetts School Building Authority recommends multiplying the construction cost by 1.25. And if you do this, you get a total cost for the new school of between $79 million and $86.6 million. So the School Building Authority recommends that the towns assume that costs will increase by 5% a year. That's just to a margin of safety. I think we have a clip of Mr. Queenie saying that.
It's the estimators tend to be on the cautious side and advocate the owner's budget for 5% escalation, and hopefully you don't have to incur that now.
Okay, so you remember that I told you that if the costs escalate at 3%, then the project will cost $79 million, and if they escalate at 5%, it'll cost $86.6 million. So in 2020, when this finally goes out to bid, it's likely to cost around $86.6 million. So just want to make sure that you're braced for that when the number finally appears. Another another issue that was discussed at the Selectmen's meeting, also occurred last night, which, again, that was February the 13th, we're taping on the 14th, was whether to allow marijuana establishments in town. The state said that if a town voted not to allow marijuana establishments, or during the referendum, if a town voted against the referendum, then it would have the option of excluding marijuana establishments in town. And at the statewide vote on that referendum, Shrewsbury voted no by 55 to 45, and so Shrewsbury has the option of banning these marijuana establishments. Now this, what do I mean by establishments? It means not only retail shops, it also means being able to cultivate it, either in a greenhouse or in a field. It means that you will be able to, it also means being able to do research and development on this stuff. So it's not just about whether you want shops in town that just dealing this. And last night there was a prolonged discussion on whether to send a article to a special town meeting on May 8th, and at that article would have banned marijuana establishments in town. None beyond the marijuana dispensary that already exists in town. I think it's down on Route 20. So that was discussed for a long time during that meeting, and the result was that the board deadlocked 2-2. There are 5 selectmen, but one of them, Mr. LeBeau, recused himself because he has a position with the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, so he couldn't break the deadlock. And so those who wanted to wanted to call a special town meeting of March 8th and present a prohibition on new marijuana establishments in town, the people who were wanted to have an article in the warrant that would prohibit such establishments, that they were Mr. Jim Kane and Beth Cassavan. And the people who are against putting such a question before the town meeting, they wanted not just that question alone, but another question that that would include regulations in case town meeting voted yes to allow the marijuana establishments. Those 2 selectmen were Moira Miller and Mo DiPaolo. Now, you might wonder what the motives are behind, what the pros and cons are, and I'm just going to give you my 2 cents. And so, first of all, if a lot of people move to Shrewsbury because they want to raise their kids here, and Mr. Kane and Mrs. Cavasant have school-age kids, and Mrs. Miller and Mr. DiPaolo don't have school-age kids. And so I think that's partly explains the split. And as for why you would want to allow it, I'll give you the arguments of those who are proposing that it be allowed, namely that it's going to be in other towns, and so why not Shrewsbury? And supposedly it would be monitored, and another advantage is that the town would make money from it. It would be able to tax the sales, and it would also be able to make arrangements with the people who establish these marijuana facilities to get some money in addition that way, permitting and such. So my own feeling is that this is not what most of the people of Shrewsbury would want. First of all, they voted against it 55 to 45. Secondly, people came to, as I said, people came to Shrewsbury to raise their kids, and they want them in a safe environment, and regarding, whether these things would be safe, I would point out, first of all, back in 2015, a proposal came before the selectmen to establish a marijuana medical dispensary. And this was supposed to supply marijuana to people who basically suffer chronic pain. People like cancer patients, people with arthritis, that sort of thing. And during those discussions about allowing this facility, the proponent, the person who was seeking to establish the dispensary, assured the selectmen that he would have surveillance cameras on the property in order to monitor it. He would have a security person there in the dispensary to make sure that nobody who was not supposed to be there would not get in. He would check the identity of clients before allowing them access, and he would store any cannabis on site in a safe. So we have somebody who is basically dealing with cancer patients and arthritis patients and other people who were in no position to cause much trouble. Nevertheless, despite the fact that he's a businessman and he's trying to avoid unnecessary costs, he was willing to install surveillance equipment. He was willing to hire personnel to surveil and protect the property. He was willing to install procedures that would inconvenience his clients. And in addition to that, he presumably, being in the business already, knew what the risks were, what things were necessary, and in his opinion, that was what was necessary. And I don't think that if a retail marijuana shop were allowed in town, that it would bother to install surveillance cameras. It would bother to keep the material in a safe. I don't think it would bother to admit people only after they'd undergone a check for their identity. In other words, I don't think that the security measures would be quite as stringent as they would be as they are at this facility, this dispensary. And so somebody who is in the business, who is dealing with a very restricted group of people who are in no condition to cause trouble. These people, even under these circumstances, he is being very wary and trying his best to avoid trouble. And I don't think, as I said, a retail establishment would do that. And please bear in mind, if allowing these establishments to be established in town involves not only allowing these retail shops, but it also would allow cultivation. And I don't know whether the cultivation would allow people to grow stuff in open fields as if they were growing potatoes or corn. I don't know whether they'd have to be in greenhouses, but you're not dealing only with retail shops. I would also point out that another reason for not allowing these establishments is that you never hear about the crime that already exists in town involving drugs. And that is part of the making sure that the taxpayers, the people who move here, have the impression that this is a wonderful, safe town in which to raise their kids, and so we don't talk about these problems. Or at least the officials don't talk about these problems. You rarely hear about them. But I can tell you that I have personally witnessed drug dealing in town. I have personally seen people smoking crack cocaine in public places in town. I won't mention the places because I don't want to embarrass the landlords, of these shopping malls, because they obviously have no involvement. I have found hypodermic needles and syringes in town parks, and I'm not the only person who has done so. This suggests that kids in town are already playing with heroin. I and other people have found packets of drugs in parks in town. And when we've brought these needles and syringes and packages of drugs to the police, they are not interested. They seem to be more interested in giving speeding tickets to people on Route 9 than protecting your kids against people who are dealing heroin, I guess. So if the police are not interested now, I don't think that they would be any more interested once the floodgates are opened. Now, you should know that there is a plan afoot to make sure that this approval passes at town meeting. It was all laid out at the February 13th meeting of the Board of Selectmen. And what it involves is getting both an article that would prohibit marijuana established in town along with an article that would allow them and regulate them. And the idea is that both articles would be discussed simultaneously. The idea is that you would be very gently nudged, or the town meeting members would be very gently nudged to believe that it was reasonable and logical to allow these facilities, because after all, they're going to be allowed elsewhere, and why not in Shrewsbury? And after all, we could make money off of it, and we need the money for it because, after all, we're giving people 4% raises, and the property taxes just aren't enough, and we can't raise fees fast enough, so we need extra sources of revenue, so let's allow in the dope dealers. What really surprised me is that they even admitted that when they want to get a particular result at town meeting, they basically stack the deck with appropriate warrant articles. I was just amazed that they admitted that. I would point out, therefore, that your town meeting members, your representatives at town meeting are going to be basically pushed into approving this. That's the plan. Despite the fact that the March 8th special town meeting, the proposal for a special town meeting on March 8th was not approved, nevertheless, this issue has not died. There still has to be a decision made one way or another on this. The town voted to impose a moratorium on new marijuana facilities until November 18th of this year, but eventually the clock will run out. And I would point out that there are a lot of other reasons for opposing this, namely that we already have a fentanyl epidemic, an opiate epidemic in the state. I would also point out that if town meeting votes to prohibit marijuana establishments in town, additional marijuana establishments in town, it can always reverse its decision. But if it votes to allow new marijuana establishments in town, it would be almost impossible to reverse the decisions because you've already got businesses up and running and you basically have to shut them down. So it's better to vote no, and if you change your mind, you can do so, than to vote yes and not be able to change your mind once you realize you've made a mess. And you might say, well, how could you make a mess? Don't you trust the people in charge? The answer is there isn't any precedent in state law for bylaws to regulate this is marijuana establishments. This is all brand new. The Attorney General hasn't approved any bylaws at all. So we have no guidance as to what works and what doesn't work, what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So you're basically taking a shot in the dark. You don't have, you're trusting the people in charge, and they don't have any experience on which to base their decisions. Furthermore, I told you that that the plan is to present 2 articles at once to make sure that both, so that they can steer your town reps into approving this by adding zoning bylaws to the articles. They also require a 2/3 majority to prohibit new establishments in town. In other words, they raise the barrier for saying no. That's another thing you should know about. The last thing I just want to point out is that, again, I know some people will say I sound terribly cynical, almost to the point of paranoia, but I've been telling you that when the town has to choose between your kids and more money, they are perfectly willing to sacrifice your kids. And this is a perfect example of that. This is a perfect example of what I've been talking about. The evidence is no clearer than this. The people whom you have trusted to preserve your nice, respectable Shrewsbury, where you bought your houses, where you're raising your kids, you hope that the town will, the value of your house will not only be preserved, but increase. You hope your kids will be safe. The people whom you trust to preserve that nice respectability, they are betraying you. And more importantly, they're betraying your kids. So as I've said before, when it comes between money and your kids take second place. So my advice to you, if you are a parent out there with school-age children, get on the phone, get on email, talk to your town reps, and put the pressure on them to vote against new marijuana establishments in town, bearing in mind that a large percentage of town reps are also either current or former town employees. So they have a stake in the money that this would generate. My own feeling is that the belief that this is going to be a bottomless, inexhaustible fountain of new revenues and that the town's going to get rich on this is just ludicrous. It's just absurd. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think that whatever additional revenue comes in is going to be worth the price that your kids are going to pay. And with that, we will sign off for tonight. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.